This may be the ugliest car in history. Oh, sorry, I got this mixed up with the Fiat Multipla video. Let's start again. This may be the most beautiful car in history. It's certainly one of the most sought after, with cars fetching crazy prices at auction. It's a car born out of a Le Mans winning heritage, delivering looks with speed and handling to match, all at an affordable price, yet somehow it had a top speed over 150 miles an hour while also not having a top speed over 150 miles an hour. This is the Jaguar E-Type story. Since the end of the Second World War, Jaguar had been producing their XK series of open-top sports cars, starting with the XK120, then XK140 and finally the XK150 in 1957. At the same time, Jaguar had been making special competition versions of the XK to race at events like the Le Mans 24-hour race. The first was the 1951 C-Type, C standing for competition, which won Le Mans twice, followed by the D-Type in 1954 that won 3 times. The C-Type used the XK120 chassis, but the D-Type shed extra pounds by switching to a monocoque body. In 1956, Jaguar withdrew from motorsports and hopes for a D-Type successor seemed dashed. But at the end of that year, Jaguar started work on a road-going version of the D-Type. This new car was christened the E-Type and had a monocoque body with sleek lines. It would retain many of the parts from the competition D-Type, but with updated suspension. In 1957, the E1A test version was put through its paces. The A stood for aluminium and featured a basic 2.4 litre 120 brake horsepower engine from the Jaguar Mark I. Despite the low power, Jaguar's own tests and motoring journalists gave it high praise. Work continued on the E-Type, but by 1958 Jaguar's focus had switched to getting the Mark X released, and the E-Type was put on the back burner. The XK150 had been released only a year earlier, so the company had time to get the E-Type right. Slowly the E2A version of the E-Type came together. It would use a larger steel chassis with an aluminium body, the 3-litre 6-cylinder engine from the XK150, plus the independent rear suspension from the Mark X, which was designed in just 27 days by Bob Knight after a bet with Jaguar boss Sir William Lyons. The suspension was so good it would be used on Jaguars into the 1990s. E2A was entered in the 1960 Le Mans race but was forced to retire. The Jaguar team worked through the rest of the year to get the car ready for production, launching the Series 1 E-Type at the Geneva Motor Show in 1961. With deadlines looming, Jaguar could only get one car ready for the unveiling, but at the last minute the team finished a second. Jaguar test driver Norman Dewis left the Coventry factory at 7 p.m, driving throughout the night to present the car to the press the following day, after a quick clean at the local dealers. The car was an instant hit, with Enzo Ferrari no less calling it the most beautiful car in the world. The sleek E-Type shape is a thing of beauty. The Jaguar boss, Sir William Lyons, had a big hand in styling most of his cars, but the E-Type was mainly done by Malcolm Sayer. It wasn't designed with the help of a wind tunnel, but by hand to have a low drag factor. The headlights were covered in plastic shrouds to help make the body as slippery as possible. The car was offered as both an open top and a 2-seater coupe. As well as being beautiful, it was a bargain to boot. It was as fast as pricier cars from Ferrari and Aston Martin, and faster than cars in its own price bracket from Porsche. It was even cheaper than the outgoing Jaguar XK150. Before launch, 2 motor journalists had been given exclusive access to an E-Type. They duly ran it through its paces, getting the car from 0 to 60 in 6.9 seconds and on to just over 150 miles an hour. Years later, this specific car was restored and found it had been tuned to give an extra 20 to 25 brake horsepower. Production E-Types couldn't make it over 140 miles an hour, let alone 150, but journalists printed the 150 mile an hour figure and Jaguar's press office was happy to quote it as a fact. And when a car goes quickly, it needs good brakes to stop again, and the Jaguar delivered. It included superior disc brakes on all four wheels, something quite unusual at the time. In fact, the E-Type's predecessor, the XK150, also included disc brakes. This put the Jaguar ahead of most of its competition who were using inferior drum brakes. There really was a bit of exaggeration going on at Jaguar, with them claiming the 3.8 litre engine could produce 265 brake horsepower, when there was a lot less than that. But the press and public didn't care when a car this stunning handled as well as it did. The press showered praise on the car, but they had a few niggles. It lacked synchromesh on the first gear, it had a cramped interior, and then there were the seats. Some found them comfortable, but others couldn't get along with them at all. In the days before ergonomic design, the seat's rake couldn't be adjusted and they were just too hard for long trips. But orders started flooding in from around the world and the car was seen being driven by celebrities in motorsport and TV. But production was slow as strikes prevented key parts from being delivered on time. Jaguar had hoped to produce nearly 6,000 in 1961, but little more than a third of that went out the door. The early 60s was a time of unrestricted speed on the newly built freeways and motorways, and E-Type owners revelled in the joy of driving on the limit, easily cruising at over 100 miles an hour. In a world where regular cars barely made it to 70 miles an hour and took an age to get there, this car was a revelation. At the end of 1964, Jaguar announced a larger 4.2 litre engine with more torque, a gearbox with full synchromesh, and improved seats. Jaguar were listening to customers' complaints and constantly improving the E-Type. And with the larger engine, the car could now reach 150 miles an hour without the special tuning to make it happen. In 1966, the 2+2 E-Type was launched, finally allowing parents with very tiny children to cram them in the back for very short journeys. This meant the wheelbase had to be increased by 3 inches. For the more laid-back family man, Jaguar offered a sacrilegious automatic gearbox. Some didn't like the 2+2's slightly awkward new shape, but customers had been asking for more room in the cabin and it sold well. That same year, Jaguar was taken over by the British Motor Corporation, but this didn't stop Jaguar from kicking off work on an E-Type replacement, codenamed XJ21. Customers wanted more space from the E-Type, and XJ21 was going to solve this with a brand new look. It would be both an open top and a coupe, with a 1970 introduction. The E-Type was revised in 1967, which owners now call the Series 1.5. The changes were all about meeting US emissions legislation, and this meant the new car could only reach 140 miles an hour, but it did offer uprated brakes. In 1968, Jaguar and the British Motor Corporation were merged again into the larger Leyland Group. This meant that Rover and Jaguar were under the same management for the first time. Rover were working on a similar car to Jaguar's E-Type replacement XJ21 project, the P6BS, but after the merger this project was killed. There were rumours that Jaguar's former head Sir William Lyons was responsible for this, but it's more likely that Leyland just had too many sports cars on their books with the upcoming Triumph TR6, MGC and Triumph Stag. The XJ21 design kept changing. First, we had a body type A based on the E-Type, then body type B that kept changing dimensions, then it was a 2+2 with a chassis from the XJ6, Then there was a smaller XJ17 variant. By 1969 it died as management decided the successor should be the XJ27 project, which would become the XJS in 1975. This made more sense as Jaguar wanted to use the same chassis across their cars to reduce costs, and they hoped a larger GT car would command higher prices. 1968 would bring the Series 2 E-Type. The 2+2 Coupe was reworked so the windscreen had a gentler slope, which gave a more elegant line as well as improving aerodynamic efficiency. The bumpers were a little larger, as were the front indicators. The air intake was enlarged, mainly to allow US customers to fit air conditioning units, something that was now offered as an optional extra. Power steering from the XJ6 was a welcome improvement. Even though the car was a little slower due to US emissions legislation, the changes were what customers wanted, and the Series 2 sold well. But E-Type owners weren't like the Tesla fanboys of today, who only see the positives and ignore the weaknesses. A 1969 Road and Track survey of 100 E-Type owners discovered many complaints about reliability that included problems like body parts falling off. Like many British cars of the period, they looked fantastic and were fun on the open road when they weren't breaking down. Jaguar had been working on new V8 and V12 engines, and they hoped to put them into the E-Type or its successor. The V12 will be fitted to the XJ6 to make it the XJ12 in 1972, and it turned out to be an amazing if thirsty engine. The V8 wasn't so lucky. Initially, Jaguar thought they could chop 4 cylinders off the V12 and call it good, but the 60-degree angle made for vibrations they just couldn't get rid of, so the engine was abandoned. So in 1971 the E-Type was released as a Series 3 with a new 5.3 litre V12, giving 314 brake horsepower. Jaguar added lower profile, wider tyres to help with the handling. All cars now use the extended chassis from the 2+2 to simplify manufacturing, which meant the coupe model was superfluous. Where the old E-Type could cruise at 100 miles an hour, the V12 Series 3 could cruise at 120. Yet the new car could only get to 146 miles an hour, a sign that it had lost some of its aerodynamics in the past 10 years, like the coverings on its headlights. But where could you use all this speed? Almost all motorways and freeways now had speed limits, and with more and more cars coming on the roads, the E-Type was more likely to be seen in a traffic jam than on the open road. With its tiny cabin and lackluster heating and air conditioning systems, the customer base found they'd much rather drive an XJ12. It offered ample space for 4 and could still blast down the road if needed. Supercar customers were looking to new offerings from Porsche, Ferrari and Lamborghini. In 1974 the E-Type got larger bumpers that the USA demanded, but this was to be the last year of production. With too many cars produced in 1974, news of the end was delayed until 1975 so stock could be sold off. The E-Type was replaced by the XJS later that same year. Amazingly, in 2014, Jaguar produced another 6 E-Types to complete an intended run of 18 motorsport lightweight E-Types from 1964. Demand, as you can imagine, was very, very strong. The E-Type has a legacy like few other cars. When Jaguar launched a new 2-seater, there were always E-Type comparisons. The E-Type shape can't be replicated today. It's so low it would go straight under a tractor trailer or articulated lorry. It wasn't until 2013 that Jaguar produced a car that was a direct successor, the F-Type. A wonderful car in its own right, but as we've put the E-Type on such a pedestal, nothing will ever compare to it. If you like these videos and want to get early access to new videos or get shoutouts like new patrons Joe Lucina and Ome, consider supporting me using the Patreon link below. and hit the subscribe button to get notified of new videos. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.